Okay. Okay, so we can now see on the screen, I'm now sharing the screen, the Mishnah Torah, Mishnah Torah on the temple.
Yes.
This is the section called Avodah, and it is a discussion of the laws of the temple, and we'll discuss this this part as we start. So the rules, the Mishnah Torah starts off as Hilchos Beis Bechira, and wants to gives us the obligation of building the Torah, and we see that the words start off with mitzvahs aseh. It is a positive mitzvah. Mitzvah aseh, positive mitzvah. Lases, to build bayis la Hashem, a house for Hashem, with its intent, purpose. Muchen lies makrivim bei, that you should be able to offer sacrifices, karbonos, the karbonos which are regularly understood and discussed in the verses of the Torah, and then be able to come there, to be able to appear there, make a pilgrimage, make festivals there, and do the appointed sacrifices for the festival time. Shenema, as the verse says, V'oseli Mikdosh, make for me a sanctuary. And the Rambam continues. The Rambam continues about the other sanctuaries. Kvar nisparish b'Torah, it has been already explicated that the Mishkan, the sanctuary, also Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu made, that specific one had its details, but it was v'hoya lefi shah, and it was there only as a temporary and temporary measure, as it says, v'chi eloi ba'osam ad, you haven't come to this point to Israel yet, but when you'll come to the place which I will choose, the verse continues, and those chosen places are described below. Okay, so this is our beginning statement in relationship to the Mishkan for Hashem, for the sanctuary, and we've said the verse "V'oseli Mikdash, make for me a sanctuary," and we've based it on, the Rambam's based it on the idea of building the Mishkan through Osele Mikdash, make for me a sanctuary. Fine. Now, this is not the only place in the Mishnah Torah where the building of the Beis HaMikdosh is mentioned, and we'll go to another specific spot within the Mishnah Torah, remembering that this section where we're coming from is called Avodah, and it speaks about the different activities and the service that happened to be in the temple, prefaced by by the idea that there has to be one, and there has to be a place, and there has to be a place where you'll need to be, where you need to synchronize it. But there were temporary places as mentioned below, and continuing on the lochas, there were temporary places till they went to Jerusalem and established Jerusalem as the permanent structure. So as I just previously said, this is not the only place in the Mishnah Torah which is mentioned. So there is another place where this is where the temple is mentioned, and we'll go to this. We'll go to this other to the other place where it's mentioned, and I get the controls of this better. Okay, so we have now in the section which is called Mishnah Torah, Kings and Wars, Hilchos Malachim, and over there it starts off and says, Shloisha mitzvahs nestabi Yisrael b'shas k'nosam v'etz Yisrael. 3 mitzvahs were commanded to the Jewish nation at the time b'shas k'nosam Yisrael. They were at the time when they went to Israel. Number 1, limneis lahem melech, to appoint for themselves a king, based on the verse Som tisom alecho melech, that you will place, that you will establish, you will set yourself up on the nation of king. Number 1, that's number 1. Number 2, lahachriz zara shel Amalek, to cut off, destroy the seed of Amalek. Shneim, as it says, Timche Zelech Amalek, that the requirement is to erase the Zecher, the memory of Amalek. And the third one, Libnes Bayis Habachira, to build the Beis Habachira, to build the temple. And the verse says, L'shichna sidrushu ba'is shoma, that you'll seek its habitation, and there you will come. The verse in Deuteronomy 12:5. Now let's go back to where we were previously. In that. So we said we need to have a place, and a place for a korbanos, and we said based on the verse, and you shall make me a sanctuary, a different verse. So we have now 2 sources where we've said that we need to build the temple. It's mentioned twice, and we have to understand what and why do we have 2 statements which are there to teach us the idea of building of the Beis HaMikdosh. In fact, we want to know, why is there a repetition? In particular, the question really is about why is it that we have 2 mentions of the building of the Beis HaMikdosh in a regular basis, on a regular basis. What we say is that the book of the Rambam is very precise, and its precision lends it to, and we ask a question, we're allowed to inquire, and we should be inquiring. Why is it that we don't have, or why is it that it's mentioned twice? Mm-hmm. Why is it such that it is mentioned twice? It surely one mention should be enough. Okay, so we can preface that and understand that there is a specific purpose for this mentioning multiple twice, or this 2 times. Number 1, there is the idea there is the idea which relates to when we saw the source for the second one, it gave us a timeline. It gave us an idea of why we're required to build up the temple, but it also gave us a timeline about how we can do it in terms of essential mitzvahs. So we could say, and it's positioned that way, that there are 3 specific mitzvahs which we mentioned when the Jews go and conquer the land, or when they were going into Israel and they were taking over land. There were 3 separate commandments, and each one of those commandments, it shows on a complementary and fulfillment of a contribution that was lacking, or that is lacking, prior to the fulfillment of that specific mitzvah. And therefore that timeline becomes important. So how is that worked out? We can see that the 3 mitzvahs in the Rambam is not just a chronological order, but a further completion of the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal being building of the temple, but the building of the temple can't happen in isolation. It has to come if other components are already there. And even though the other components are individual components, they're their own mitzvah in this particular idea. Notwithstanding that, there is a further completionary aspect to it, that without those other parts, it's not as complete. We have this idea that this potential idea in other areas of halacha, whereby you can have something as a separate mitzvah, nevertheless aligned to it, and when all the other parts are in place, it becomes more of a completion of the mitzvah. So, what's an example of that? An example of that is putting on tefillin, as an example. The tefillin which we put on, we have a tefillin of the hand, we have a tefillin of the head. Each one of them, technically speaking, and so it is in our siddur, have got their own bracha. That they've got their own bracha is an indication that they're separate. Notwithstanding that, when we put them on, and certainly this is the way that the custom in Chabad is to put it on, is that the first bracha is in an inclusive bracha, and therefore can include the second one. So there isn't a deliberate need to enunciate the second one. However, if something caused a breakage of the linkage between one and the two, for instance, you make some sort of interruption, some sort of activity that acted at some sort of interruption between putting on the first, the one on your hand to the one on your head, then you are required to make a second bracha and to continue that linkage. But if there isn't a breakage, the first one, the first bracha includes the activity of the second one. And what happens when you pray it with both the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, you've completed the mitzvah of putting on tefillin in its most robust sense, in its completed sense, as the passage within the Shema talks about. Ukshartem, you'll tie them on your hand, right, as a sign, and you put it in on your head, between your eyes. So therefore, they're linked together in the same verse. It becomes more of a complete entity when you've done both. So this shows that the mitzvah of putting on the tefillin, each one of them can be affected by the other, and when they're done together, it enhances each one. So similarly said, when we saw the three stages that were mentioned in the halachas of the Rambam, in finally enacting the building of the Beis HaMikdosh, there's a three-step process. And each of those three steps enhances the mitzvah. So how does it enhance it? So the first one, the idea of coming into Israel, the quote was that that there are the commandments of coming into Israel, when they come into Israel, and the first thing is that they have to appoint for themselves a king.
Right.
So the idea of appointing themselves a king is that the king is the one that establishes the robustness of the empire, and he's the one who can unite the people together to ultimately do the next point that's required, which is to wage the war and to wage the war so that we can ultimately eradicate Amalek. Why do we ultimately need to eradicate Amalek? Because Amalek is described as the nation which from its inception opposed the godly dwelling of Hashem in this world. This is discussed at length in the mystical tractate, a relationship to Amalek, and within the story of Purim and other places of Haman. Ultimately, Amalek is considered the enemies of Israel to the point that they will always try to dissuade us from our service to Hashem. So the king is necessary to wage that war. It is with the sanction of the Sanhedrin that you wage a war, and it's only then do you have the peace that you need to continue on to be able to serve Hashem, and it's associated with a verse, and I'm going to find and to share that verse. So we see that in the passage of Amalek, it says in the passage, so remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, cut down all the stragglers in your rear. This section is well discussed to say that after all the great miracles of coming out of Egypt, even though the whole world was in awe of Israel after the miracles which happened to them in Egypt, Amalek was the one who took Israel down a step and then allowed the other peoples of the world to have their to attack the Jewish nation and to take away their all from them, even though everyone knew and perceived that God was on their side. So Amalek, in this sense, represents the ultimate evil in that they don't want to recognize, they have not recognized the special relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. And even though it meant their own demise, they were willing to attack the Jewish people in order to reduce them, take them down a notch, reduce the nation's awe of God and their special connection with the Jewish people. So that is recognized as being something which is absolutely against the building of the nation, the Jewish nation, and its purpose of revelation of godliness to the world. So the next statement after this is V'hoyo b'haniach Hashem alakecho v'lech b'chol oivecho b'soviv b'oretz Hashem alakecho nosen l'cho nachla l'rishto. So therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, so meaning that the idea behind that is that after, when the Jewish nation has peace from all the enemies, so the implication of that is when you go into Israel or any and certainly of the ultimate revelation of godliness, that'll be peace from your enemies. What you're required to do is then eradicate eradicate the seed of Amalek. In other words, eradicate the evil out of all existence, so that there is no potential of anti-Semitism that will stop the continuation of the establishment of the kingdom of Hashem by the Jewish people in Israel. So going back to our portions of the mitzvahs. So we have the three mitzvahs when you come into Israel, to appoint the king, and then when you have the king, he'll be able to lahachriz zara shel Amalek. He'll be able to take out the seed of Amalek from the words Timcha Zecher Amalek, and that's where the verses that we just saw. And then his next thing that he has to do is livnas beis habechira, to build a house of Hashem, where Hashem will be. Now, to build this lios beis habechira, each one of these are three separate mitzvahs, but each one doesn't come to its completion without the other. That is to say, the building, the Timcha Zecher Melech, needs the king, with the permission from the Sanhedrin, to fight this holy war, be successful, and then do the next stage. And then that's what the Rambam points out over here in the continuation of the phrase. Monoi melech kedem milchemes hamelech. The appointment of the king comes before the war of Amalek, as it says in the story of King David, that God has sent me to anoint you as king. Now go and smite Amalek. And then the eradication of Amalek will then precedes the construction of the temple, because it is after the successful waging of the war of David Amalek, of King David, that King David says, and the verse continues in Samuel, and so it was when the king was settled in his home and God allowed him respite from his enemies all around. So this idea of the respite from all his enemies all around refers back to the story of the verses of Amalek, when you will have that all as safety. So the king then said to the prophet, I'm living a house of cedar, but nevertheless there is the house of the Lord, and I need to build that house of the Lord. Okay. So therefore we've got now that the verses are indicating that the secure establishment of the monarchy, that is, the king dwelt in the house in that verses that we saw, and the destruction of Amalek, that he had the peace from all the enemies which surround him, and the building of the Beis HaMikdosh then become all are, as we've said, interrelated, and one is not necessarily a prerequisite, but when they're done in that order, they have a higher level of completion. And in order to emphasize this idea of that higher state of completion, the Rambam chooses to make a proof of his halachas that there has to be the building deliberately from these verses, from the verses which relate to this passage and this period of time from the building of the three stages of going into Israel. Hence, the original verse that we saw, the Osili Migdash, that build for me the sanctuary, which is in Shemais, that acts as a generic, maybe it's not the right word, but the general rule about building of the temple. Mm-hmm. While this second place that we just looked at acts as the one which is pertinent for the timeline that we suggested of the three mitzvahs, and each one becoming a fulfillment of the other. Mm-hmm. So now, if we go back to, I'll share this in a minute, but I'm going to go back to the Deuteronomy verses, because as you see, and I'll now share that screen back again. And now that we've seen that there are the three passages, the first thing is to appoint the king, and that's the verse over here. Som tosim alecha melech asher yivcha alecha Beis. So then you'll be able to free set a king over yourself, one chosen by Hashem, etc. And with the discussion in relationship to it. then we go to that place where we just were before in relationship to a Molech. Um, so I don't think they've clicked themselves. So anyway, that was this one over there. This is this reference over here. I don't think they've got their hyperlink correct. Anyway, so this is there, and this is that second one of Zecher Amalek, and then as it comes back to, we come back to that this place of so this is the, and then when in the flow of Moshe Rabbeinu speaking in Dvarim, even though it's not in that order, but we see the mitzvah, the ki elamokim asher yibchar Hashem lakeichem b'chol shiftei losam eshmei sham lishna. That's where, look to the place where Hashem will choose, lishchana, that he will dwell there, and sadrashu, and you will seek him, uvasa shama, you will come there. So within the Rambam is being very meticulous in now showing us the different stages where okay, so then the Rambam is then speaking over here in terms of the stages of building the temple. The first thing is that we appoint the king, who then will complete the mitzvah of the destruction of Amalek, and then we'll complete the mitzvah of and build the temple, and so that we'll be able to go there. So we originally had an implication of a question. Why is it that the Rambam first utilized the generic mitzvah of V'oseli Mikdosh, build for me a sanctuary, in the discussion of the building of the temple, because he's in this area speaking about the building of the temple and all the operations of within the temple in the further chapters that go in this section, and that the temple had some temporary places till it became the final resting place, which was Jerusalem. We use the expression Oseli Mikdash. He uses the verse Oseli Mikdash because this is the generic, general mitzvah of building it. Right. Then the specific and the timeline, how the mitzvah will get enhanced, and the processes which are needed thereby are mentioned in this other source where we went through the three specific mitzvahs. And it's only when these three specific mitzvahs are completed will we accomplish the idea of living in the living in the kingdom of Hashem with the Beis HaMikdosh in its operational sense and running correctly. So we see that we can fulfill the mitzvah in multiple stages. Each stage has a further sense of completion, so that it was further enhanced and completed. Now, historically, we had also the other stages where the temple was temporarily appointed. We had leaders, but weren't necessarily kings, though they acted like kings. For instance, Joshua, when the sanctuary was where it was temporarily stationed in Shiloh, Joshua acted in a role of king, but he wasn't appointed the king. He was the leader. So there we had those three conditions. They were in Israel, but they didn't have full peace from their enemies, but we had partial, and Yeshua was partially in the role as king, and we had the temple in a temporary sanction. But it's only in the time of King David did it completely come to its ultimate expression, as the verse was expressed in the three stages in the Rambam section. Hence, we can understand that the Rambam, when he was speaking on the topic of building the Beis HaMikdosh and how it was being running, speaking about the house of Hashem, the house of Hashem in its completest sense, and therefore use the general overarching mitzvah of Osali Mikdosh, build for me a sanctuary, as its defining verse, while in the section where he's speaking about coming into Israel and completing all the activities that the king has to do, and the ultimate objective of building the temple, that is, there he expressed all the three different stages of building the temple. Now, we have in the sense of the positive dimensions that are needed when in the building of the Mikdash, of the third Beis HaMikdash through Mashiach. Mashiach is actually called King Mashiach. When you look up the references, he is called the King Mashiach. Mashiach literally means the anointed one, but the anointed one, in our reference, in our understanding of the one who will ultimately build the third Beis HaMikdash, in its fullest sense, comes via the King Mashiach, and it'll be done in Israel, and all the nations of the world will appreciate the building of and the establishment of the secure monarchy of King Mashiach with the nation Yisrael, with the temple. So, based on the understanding of the Rambam, as we've just learned it, we can appreciate that how this will be done, because ultimately it says King Mashiach will wage the wars that are necessary for the eradication of Israel's enemies, including in that will be the spiritual war against Amalek, because Amalek is the role of the people who take on the role of denying godliness in the world. So King Mashiach will wage the spiritual war against Amalek, and that will allow the building, the total perfection and completion of the temple in our days. And we can ourselves enhance and bring that to bear, you and me and everyone else, by waging our spiritual war against Amalek and doing activities which build the temple, because as we mentioned right at the beginning, that we can, all our good deeds and our good activities promote the building of the temple in a spiritual sense, and even more so, our learning the rules, as we're doing together now, about building the Mashiach, building the temple. Even though we're not physically doing it, we're learning the rules, so we're in a preparatory state, and we're preparing ourselves by understanding the rules. And as is in other areas in halacha where we can see that even when we can't do it, like in the rules of korbanos, says that when we learn the rules or mention the laws of korbanos, our mentioning of it is as if we did it. So in a similar sense, our learning the laws and preparing for the building of the temple prepares us, and we build it in a spiritual sense till it'll come to the time of the ultimate redemption, when King Mashiach will build in a physical sense, in a spiritual sense, the temple, and bring it all together in that timeline. So we can actually act in our own ways as the precursors to that, and as the assistants to that. And by virtue of our deeds, we help the revelation of the divine presence to come down and to reveal itself through our good deeds. So with that, we've tied together the two areas where the Rambam has spoken about the building the Beis HaMikdosh, given reasons for it, and established for our own selves a motivation how we can help and do that further.